in a struggle as old as time. There are two religions, destined for a conflict. This conflict will be unlike anything ever seen. What will happen? Discover the Bible Prophecy. Islam and Christianity, a Bible Prophecy Seminar by Tim Roosenberg.
Welcome you this evening to the role of Islam in the coming conflict. We're going to be taking a look at Daniel 11 verses 40 to 43. In Daniel 11, 40 to 43, it describes the third and final conflict between Islam and Christianity. Here's what it says. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. And he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. I want you to notice a couple of things right now. And that is that we have the king of the south, which is Islam, pushing first. They're going to get the king of the north angry. And then when the king of the north enters the battle or the fray, it's then going to go like a whirlwind. How fast is a whirlwind? In Daniel 11, it takes centuries. I'm not sure how fast a whirlwind is. It could be days, it could be months, it could be a few years. But I know the first two conflicts, the Crusades, took a couple of centuries. The Ottoman Empire took about 4 centuries. This one is going to be relatively quick in comparison. That's what I do know. Continuing. He, the king of the north, shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon, and he shall stretch his hand against the countries. So the king of the north, papal-led Christianity, will be in Israel. And Edom, Moab, and Ammon are going to be escaping. And the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. That's what Daniel 11 has to say about this third and final conflict between Islam and Christianity. Now let's work on unpacking this one for a little bit. As we've mentioned, the Christians have come in from the north in the Crusades. Islam had come in from the south. God's people get caught in the middle. That was verses 25 to 28 for the Crusades. The Ottoman Empire, verses 29 to 39 in Daniel 11. And now we're looking at the third and final conflict. If I take a look at the current world map, and what I'm going to notice is that the Islamic world in red is still predominantly to the south of Israel, while the European Christian empires from the past are still predominantly north. And they're still the predominantly Christian viewed as such of the world. So Israel is still pretty much in between. And yes, I know Turkey's got kind of yellows and red both there. That's because they're politically aligned with NATO, the Christian world. They're spiritually aligned with Islam, which makes them a rather interesting position. Charles Malik, he was president of the United Nations General Assembly for 1 year. He was born in Lebanon into an Orthodox Christian family. He was a guest lecturer at Harvard and an ambassador from Lebanon to the United States. So he's a pretty colorful guy with his history. He says this back in the 1970s. The only hope for the Western world lies in an alliance between the Roman Catholic Church, which is the most commonly influential, controlling, and unifying element in Europe, and the Eastern Orthodox Church. Rome must unite with Eastern Orthodoxy because the Eastern Orthodox Church controls the Western Middle East. And if they don't solidify that control, Islam will march across Europe. Islam is political. The only hope of the Western world lies then in a united Europe under the control of the Pope. In the 1970s, the guy that was UN General Assembly, he says the only solution to the current world situation is if the world unites under the Pope against radical Islam. And the world didn't even think we had a radical Islamic problem in the 1970s. But he saw it coming, and he knew the history. He wasn't done. Then he said the following, and then all Protestant Christians around the globe must come into a submission to the Pope, so we will have a unified Christian world. So this guy is saying, hey, the world needs to come under submission to the Pope because we have a global conflict brewing with radical Islam. Who's the only power that stopped the spread of Islam in the Arab Islamic Caliphate? The Papacy did. Who's the power that stopped the Ottoman Islamic Empire? The Papacy did. Have you noticed, while radical Islam is growing in power, the Papacy is coming up again too? Oh, wow. Prophecy is on its third cycle as it comes through here, and history is repeating. Now, the king of the north and the king of the south are like polar opposites. They're much alike, yet different. The North Pole and the South Pole, they're both white and both cold. But they're polar opposites. So the king of the north, do they ever persecute God's saints? Well, it says they would in Daniel 7:25, but the Inquisition and things like that, the Reformation, millions of people burned at the stake and things down that order. And down to the south, we have Islam. So I just take a look at it. The king of the north, papal-led Christianity, killed Jews, Muslims, and Christians who disagreed with him, while the king of the south killed Jews, Christians, and Muslims who disagreed with him. Do you really hear a whole lot of difference in there? And guess what happens if you're serving God? Either side can go after you. You get caught in the middle. Yep. Next one. Rome would receive, they would receive the dragon seat, or the capital of the Roman Empire. And the papacy got Rome. But there were two capitals of the Roman Empire. The other one was Constantinople, which is now known as Istanbul, and it became the capital of the Ottoman Islamic Empire. So papal-led Christianity gets one, Islam gets the other. Kind of interesting. Continuing. In Revelation 9, there are time prophecies for Islam, just like there were time prophecies in Revelation and Daniel for papal-led Christianity, the time period of their supremacy. But in Revelation 9, verse 5, we have the 5 months or 150 years of Arab Islam. Then you have the 391 years and 15 days of the Ottoman Islamic Empire, which is the second woe or the sixth trumpet. Now at the end of that, the first woe in Revelation 9, it said, one woe is past, behold, still two more woes are coming after these things. Let's see how good you are at math. One woe plus two woes equals three woes. In Revelation, there are three conflicts or woes between Islam and Christianity. In Daniel, there are three conflicts between the breakup of Rome and the coming of Christ, between the king of the north and the king of the south. Daniel and Revelation use different words, but they're parallel to each other. And so, in the first woe, Arab Islam comes through Israel, goes into the Middle East, then comes across North Africa. And that's the territory that they conquered during their expansion in the 150 years. Then they moved the caliphate, or the capital, over to Baghdad, and they began the decline. And that's when papal-led Christianity slams in the Crusades to try and keep them contained. Then the second woe, the Ottoman Islamic Empire comes in. The Turks come in from the east, they convert to Islam, and then they take this new brand of Islam and they push it on up into Europe, and they take Constantinople, the eastern capital of the Roman Empire. Why did God allow these invasions of the Christian world by the Muslims? Well, the Bible actually tells us. We don't have to guess. We find it in verse 20 and 21. But the rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the works of their hands, that they should not worship demons and idols of gold, silver, brass, stone, and wood, which can neither see nor hear nor walk. And they did not repent of their murders or their sorceries or their sexual immorality or their thefts. Why does God do it? He says they're starting to worship images. What happened to ancient Israel when they started worshiping images, idols? In would come one invader or another and cause them all kinds of havoc, right? What happens to the Christian church when they start erecting images and bowing down to them in their churches? In come the Muslims, invaders. And what is it, one of the major things that Muhammad doesn't like? He doesn't like image worship. And he goes after it. Which is exactly why God said to expect this. How good is it going to work? Is it going to cure the problem in the Christian church? Nope. Says they still wouldn't repent. You still find images in a lot of the churches, especially the Catholic and Orthodox varieties. And that's what caused the problem back then. Now, another thing that happens, though, if you look up in the map, up in the top left corner, you see Germanic tribes. I want to tell you something that was going on. God uses all things for good. He's punishing Christianity for not following his word, for one thing. But on the other hand, he's using Islam, the Ottoman Empire, to protect some of the reformers. Martin Luther comes on the scene. And the Pope would really like to have eliminated Martin Luther early on, but he had a problem. He had to get all the military forces he could get and move them down to the south to stop the spread of the Turks coming in. He couldn't afford to have a civil war. He needed those princes and their armies that were supporting Martin Luther in the fight against the Muslims. Couldn't afford a civil war up there, and so he couldn't force the issue with Martin Luther. Martin Luther realized what was going on, and Martin Luther said the greatest defender he ever had was the Sultan of Turkey. Because every time the Pope thought maybe now he can go eliminate Martin Luther, the Turks would push in and it would protect Martin Luther. And so here's what you can know. Islam was used of God to punish Christianity for the evils that Christianity had developed. It was also used to protect the Reformation and to help protect the new translations of the Bible to keep them from being destroyed. So God used Islam for a very specific and powerful way. All right, now let's keep going. If we have three conflicts in both, two are past: Arab Islam and Ottoman Islam. We have one future. The third woe in Revelation is really difficult to follow and understand. However, the third conflict in Daniel 11, which we read a little bit ago, is much more straightforward, and it's not even symbolic. It gives you the name of the nations that will be involved eventually. So it's a lot easier to follow. But notice it says, at the appointed time he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. That's Daniel 11:29. The former is the Crusades, the appointed is the Ottoman Empire, and the latter is the time of the end. Now, friends, I have a paper online under resources on islamandchristianity.org. And this will explain something I'm going to cover very quickly right now. In Daniel 12, it says that there is a prophecy of the 1290 and the 1335 from the abomination of desolation to a blessing. It's been considered a rather difficult time, prophecy. However, in my study, I've learned something. There are two abominations of desolation in Daniel. One in Daniel 9, the other in Daniel 11. If you run them prophecies from both abominations of desolation, you get something amazing. The first one is 70 AD at the fall of the temple. Pagan Rome does the abomination of desolation, and Jesus identifies it as such in Matthew 24. 1290 years later brings you to Wycliffe. That's the beginning of the Reformation, and the Ottoman Empire is just gaining power. And verses 29 to 39, the appointed time, are the time of the Ottomans and the Reformation. And Wycliffe is the beginning of it. And this is the very year that he begins to attack the evils of the Christian church. 1335 brings us to 1405. Notice these are both right at the close of the Crusades, just as the Ottoman Empire is coming in. He's the first practicing reformer. And so that time prophecy hits right exactly on the years that are pivotal for the Reformation. Now, if you go from 508, which is when the papacy gets the force of arms from the French King Clovis joining in to give them military might, to go after those who disagree with the papacy in military ways. That is, now, the first one was an abomination against the sanctuary. This one is against the host or the people that are following Jesus Christ. 1290 years from that one brings us down to 1798, which happens to be the year the papacy lost their power to persecute. That was good news. Just like the beginning of the Reformation was good news. And 508, 1335 brings us down to 1843, the spring of 1844, which is when the judgment begins in heaven. And I'll present more about that one in presentation number 7. So we'll get to that. But what I want you to notice now, between those two white lines is the time of the Ottoman Empire at the appointed time. The appointed time, according to Daniel, is also the latter part of the indignation. So it's not just a point in time, it's a period of time. And it's amazing. It's the second conflict between Islam and Christianity that happens within those boundaries. Read the whole 12-page paper and you'll get even more out of it. But I've got to keep going. But the king of the north gets a deadly wound and then comes back with great power, according to Revelation 13:3. It's called the beast in Revelation. But here is the power curve of the papacy. 538 to 1798. They begin to come back when they sign a concordat with Mussolini in 1929. And John Paul takes them up in the greater power, and they will come to their end at the coming of Jesus Christ. Now let's superimpose over that the Islamic power curve. And you have Arab Islam up to the Crusades, then Ottoman Islam, then they drop down, and then they come back up at the time of the end for the third and final holy war. Notice how similar those two power graphs are. The king of the north and king of the south are always there in relationship with each other and in conflict with each other. Now, it says in Daniel 11 verse 40, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. Could that happen? Well, in today's world, it doesn't take much imagination to see it happening, right? Well, I'm here to tell you tonight that it's probably already begun, just recently. Both Sunni and Shia Islam have apocalyptic views. They're not in this just because they want territory. They believe that it is their role to make this world Islamic. Sunni Islam, the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, the majority of Muslims, they believe that there is going to be a showdown in Syria, and if they can get, especially this Islamic State, if they can get the whole world really mad at them and attack them, then they will be reduced to 5,000 fighters, then God will win for them. And that's their overall view. So if you let the Islamic State go, if you're a political leader in today's world, they're just going to keep pushing and expanding to take over the world. If you attack them, they're going to fight down to the end because they believe they'll be reduced to 5,000. They're not going to quit. There's no way out of this thing without a major conflict now. Once they've got their foothold and they got rolling like they have with their apocalyptic beliefs. And then Shia Islam has something very similar in mind with the 12th Imam. And they believe Jesus will come back with him and help all of you that are Christians become Muslims, and then anyone who doesn't convert to Islam will be put to death and all the world will be Islamic. And so they both have that kind of viewpoint. It's interesting that the Dajjal or Antichrist will be destroyed by Jesus in or around Jerusalem in both of the viewpoints. And both of them want to put a caliphate or the capital of Islam in guess what city? Jerusalem. And it says the king of the north sets his headquarters up in Jerusalem, not the king of the south. The king of the south may be trying, and that's why the king of the north does it. But just some things to keep in mind as you're watching things develop. Then Mary comes on the scene and she makes some very interesting statements. This is the book Thunder of Justice. It was a whole series of prophecies that were supposed to happen around the year 2000, most of which did not. There will be a World War III, and it will be started by a man who wears the turban of the faith, a Muslim. Yet there is a more powerful one to rise in Syria. And when this one has accomplished his work, he will cause destruction and pain and great persecution. The red will flow into the sea. There will be nothing to eat. The Antichrist is going to arise from the Mohammedan race, a Muslim. Whoa. Where is the blood flowing really in this world right now? Syria? Yeah, got that one. Here's Mary saying the Antichrist is going to be a Muslim. If you have a holy war, you've got to get the Christians thinking the Muslims are all of the devil. Hey, a good way to do that is say they're Antichrist. And so what you're looking at there is part of the lead-in I believe, to a holy war. He's going to have a turban. The people will call it the Eye of Satan. He will be young, wearing a long robe, be very intelligent and well-equipped for nuclear war. That sounds a lot like Iran and the 12th Imam in that phrase. Worse than Hitler, connected with communists, fire rockets at us, and some will hit New York City. Well, that's back to Sunni Islam, if that was New York in 2001. So this is some interesting stuff that so-called Mary, I don't think it was. I think it was somebody coming up with this on their own, or maybe even satanically given to them, inspired by a source other than God. But now many evangelicals and talk show hosts are now teaching that the Antichrist will be a Muslim. Waleed Shoebat, Joel Richardson, Joel Rosenberg, Tim LaHaye, Glenn Beck. These are some of the people that are saying that they're expecting the Antichrist to be Islamic. And those people have tremendous followings in today's world. Now, right after Osama bin Laden was killed, we have this statement. A leader of the Al-Qaeda offshoot that U.S. officials have called the greatest threat to U.S. vowed in a message posted on Islamist websites Wednesday to take revenge against the U.S. for the death of Osama bin Laden, saying that jihad would only intensify and that Americans would come to wish for the days of Osama. So right after Osama bin Laden dies, they're saying, oh, this holy war isn't over. It's going into higher gear. We're coming after you. I don't know. If you can think back all the way to 2011, 4 years ago, wow. Has radical Islam made good on that one? Definitely. They're definitely pushing hard, and they haven't stopped pushing yet. That jihad is holy war. And the flip side in Christianity, there's a very similar war. It's called crusade. And so jihad and crusade. By the way, those are words you don't want to use if you're trying to invite the other group to listen to you. Be careful about the usage of words. And so in Daniel 11:40-43, we have Israel, Islam attacking the United States, and the Papacy and its allies counterattack Islam and enter Palestine or Israel. And Islam gets divided 3 ways. And those 3 ways in the text were, the first one is Edom, Moab, and Ammon escape. There is no country of Edom, Moab, or Ammon any longer. There's only remnants of them, and they're in western Jordan. We're going to come back to that one last because that's the good news in this package. The second one is Egypt and many countries are overthrown in the text. And so, yes, I believe Egypt will be overthrown, but just like Israel is geopolitical and spiritual, the king of the north is geopolitical and spiritual, and the king of the south is geopolitical and spiritual, I believe all these countries will be as well. So Egypt is going to represent Egypt, of course, but it also represents radical Islam spiritually all over the world. Then we have those who follow after Libya and Ethiopia. They will follow the king of the north. And in Revelation 13:3, and it says, all the world marveled and followed the beast, which is papal-led Christianity, the same as the king of the north. And so that would be more moderate Muslims who say, hey, don't kill us. We're going to cooperate with you. We don't like radical Islam either. And they will go against radical Islam and join the Christian world in the conflict. So we're going to take a look at those last 2 parts. Egypt up here in northeastern Africa, I do believe Egypt's going down. But as I mentioned, they represent radical Islam all over the world. Moderate Islam, Libya and Ethiopia, well, Ethiopia, they're a mix of Christian and Muslim, so it makes sense why they would join the the Christian world. But Libya, on the other hand, well, let's take a look at the more modern borders. It's shrunk considerably since what it used to be. But the rest of what was Libya, they don't like radical Islam too well up in North Africa. Libya is still having trouble with it. But the people of Libya would love to get rid of it because they'd like to have really good relationships with the European nations just to the north because they have a lot of oil and they could do pretty well if they had good relationships. Egypt, on the other hand, is the birthplace of radical Islam. That's where in the 1920s the Muslim Brotherhood had its beginnings, and from there radical Islam has grown across the Middle East. And Egypt is the one that actually succeeded in electing radical Islam in the office, the Muslim Brotherhood, Mohammed Morsi, for president for just over a year. And then he was taken out of power by the military. But if they had a fully free election, that could happen again in Egypt. Because the people of Egypt don't really like the West too well, if you take a survey on the street, while the people of Libya really would like to get rid of radical Islam because they do like the West a lot better. So everything is really in play already for what to expect here. Now, how might this really happen for the Islam attacking and papal-led Christianity in the U.S. to come back? Well, the real issue is, again, probably in Syria and Iraq. That's where the Islamic State is now growing in power. And on July 1, we have this article in the Telegraph reporting on something that happened right at the end of June. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the self-proclaimed leader of the Islamic State stretching across Iraq and Syria, has vowed to lead the conquest of Rome as he called on Muslims to immigrate to his new land to fight under its banner around the globe. Remember the comment that was made by the guy, just went blank on a guy's name, the UN General Assembly leader, Charles, Anyway, he said that Europe needed to come together behind Rome to stop radical Islam, and then all Christians around the globe. Look what he just said. He was going to attack Rome, and he's calling for people all over the globe to go to the war with Christianity. And that's what he's after. He's setting up a caliphate. A caliphate is the leader of all Islam in the world, both politically and spiritually. So for the first time since the Ottoman Empire, in the end of June of 2014, we now have a king of the south, or a caliphate again. And within a month, we're going to have the king of the north going out and making a statement against him. But scary is the fact that in July of 2014, there was a survey taken in Saudi Arabia, and 92% of Saudis believed that the Islamic State represented true Islamic values. Think about what was going on in July. People were getting butchered all over Iraq and Syria as they were pushing through. And they believed that that was true Islamic law. Then, on August 7, because Christians in Yazidis were getting butchered, the Pope came out and made a statement. Pope Francis appealed to world leaders on Thursday to help end the crisis in northern Iraq after a sweeping advance by radical Islamic State militants forced thousands of residents of Iraq's biggest Christian town to flee their homes. His Holiness addresses an urgent appeal to the international community to take action to end the humanitarian tragedy now underway. Friends, at this point, we already have a king of the south. Abu Bakr has established a caliphate. Just a month later, the Pope comes out and calls for military action for the first time since the fall of the Ottoman Empire. We now have a king of the north and a king of the south in play, and they're both opposed to each other. Daniel 11 is now being fulfilled, I believe, in the third conflict. We have entered this time period, is my belief. It's like we've entered it and we're just hanging on the edge, ready to take a nosedive into this conflict. And when we do, it will be like a whirlwind. But friends, it's hard to figure out how long this whirlwind's going to be. I already told you that. So I'm not sure if we're already falling into it or we're just on the edge of it. But what I'm now going to do is share several different news stories in the order that they happened, and it might give you a little sense of what's been happening in our world. A day after the Pope calls for military action, the President of the United States, Obama, says America is coming to help. And approximately 24 hours after the Pope calls for military action against the Islamic State, the United States begins to bomb the Islamic State. That is now, radical Islam now calls the United States the dog of Rome. Rome said sic 'em, and the United States hit. August 11, referring to military action, Archbishop Giorgio Lingua, the Vatican's nuncio to Iraq, told Vatican Radio this is something that had to be done, otherwise the Islamic State could not be stopped. Such a call is virtually unprecedented since the Ottoman Empire for a papal envoy in modern times. But our age is an extraordinary one, and the Islamic State has no interest in a bargaining table. Instead, the Islamic State is bent on genocide and barbarism, ruthlessly exterminating anyone who opposes them. Then, Breitbart News on August 13, the Holy See's ambassador to the United Nations, Silvano Tomasi, this weekend supported U.S. airstrikes aimed at halting the advance of Sunni Islamic State militants, calling for intervention now before it's too late. Goes on to say, while the Vatican vocally disapproved of the U.S. campaign in Iraq in 2003 and 2013, planned for airstrikes on Syria, fearing both might make the situation worse for Christians on the ground, fears of ethnic cleansing by Islamists has forced a policy change. Now, friends, remember back to Daniel 11, verse 40. It says, the king of the south will push against the king of the north, then the king of the north will get tired of it and will respond, and it will be like a whirlwind. Why does the Pope come out and call for military action against radical Islam? Because they're killing Christians in large numbers. Which exactly matches the scenario of the start of the third conflict in Daniel 11. You see, people used to ask me, Tim, are we in this holy war yet? And I'd say, no, the papacy hasn't called for it and let out in it. Well, I can't truthfully say that since August 7, because now the papacy's called for it. And the world is responding to the call to some degree, and it's getting louder in the response. Then on August 20, the Islamic State beheads James Foley and puts it out on YouTube video. And the world begins to get a graphic nature of the cruelty and barbarism of the Islamic State. Catholic Herald on September 4. Former Israeli President Shimon Peres has said that Pope Francis is more powerful than the United Nations when it comes to advocating peace. While visiting the Vatican earlier today, Mr. Peres asked Pope Francis to head a parallel United Nations called the United Religions to counter religious extremism in the world today. Peres said the United Nations and its peacekeepers do not have the force or the effectiveness of any one of the Pope's homilies, which can draw 500,000 people just in St. Peter's Square alone. So given that the United Nations has run its course, what we need is an organization of united religions, Mr. Peres said, as the best way to counteract these terrorists who kill in the name of their faith. What we need is an unquestionable moral authority who says out loud, no, God doesn't want this and doesn't allow it, he added. So Peres, a Jew, is calling for this. I have a quick question. Who was it that let out in the Inquisition? The papacy did. They killed, because of their decrees and their stands, millions of people were put to death because they disagreed with the papists religiously. People that wanted to make the Bible first in their life. Oh, for that they were put to death. And you want to put the papacy in charge of religions and say, don't kill in the name of religion? When they've got 50 plus million people that have been killed because of disagreements on religion? It's putting the fox in charge of the henhouse. Then, September 16. Telegraph in London. What has been declared by the self-declared Islamic State is clear. They want to kill the Pope. The threats against the Pope are credible. The Pope had made himself a target by speaking out against the human rights abuses committed against Christians in Syria and Iraq, as well as by his approval of attempts of the U.S. to try and roll back ISIL. So now the Islamic State has actually named the Pope as a target, and I have a quick question. What if they were successful in taking the Pope down, an assassination? You could be in a holy war really fast right after that, couldn't you? If the so-called leader of Christianity, and who does the media see as the leader of Christianity? The Pope. By the way, the media has really fallen in love with this guy. And this Pope doesn't like security. He likes to have close contact with the crowds, making him very hard to protect. And there's a death threat out from the radical state, Islamic State. Now, September 16. In an unprecedented joint statement, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and Al-Qaeda of the Islamic Maghreb, that's Africa, urged their brothers in Iraq and Syria to stop killing each other and unite against the American campaign and its evil coalition that threatens us all. So what has the U.S. bombing campaign in Iraq and Syria against the Islamic State so far accomplished? It's causing radical Muslims to unite. And 40 to 60 groups, I see different numbers in this articles, 40 to 60 groups of radical Muslims have declared their allegiance to the Islamic State all over the world. Well, that's not what was intended by the bombing campaign, but that's what's happened. Then in November, Abu Bakr was almost killed, and he got mad. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of the extremist group ISIS, called on his supporters to erupt volcanoes of jihad everywhere, light the earth with fire, and since then there's been a major terrorist attack somewhere in the world every month. Al-Qaeda didn't ever pull that one off. But that's what we're having happen now. People that have sworn allegiance to the Islamic State are pulling off one event after another. Then, in November 17, Jihadi John, this is the executioner on those videos of the Islamic State, the guy with the British accent, says to Obama, the dog of Rome, they get it that the United States is the enforcer for the papacy. That's what it says in Revelation 13 as well. Today we are slaughtering the soldiers of Bashar, that's Assad in Syria. And tomorrow we will be slaughtering your soldiers, and with Allah's permission, we will break this final and last crusade in the Islamic State. By the way, he might be right on this last holy war too. Only it won't end the way he thinks it does. But we're looking at the third and final holy war according to Daniel 11. So good news is it's almost done with war. And he continues, and the Islamic State will soon, like your puppet David Cameron said, begin to slaughter your people on your streets. Sounds like not a very friendly guy, doesn't it? He wants you to be afraid of them, and he wants you to get so upset that you're willing to send all the armies of the world into Syria to attack them. That's what he's after. And they're going to keep pushing out until they get what they want. They've made it clear. December. Pope Francis said that equating Islam with violence was wrong and called on Muslim leaders to issue a global condemnation of terrorism to help dispel the stereotype. You just can't say all Muslims are terrorists, just as you can't say that all Christians are fundamentalists. We have our share of them fundamentalists. All religions have these little groups. Two things to note here. Number one, the Pope is very actively courting moderate Muslims. In Daniel 11, moderate Muslims follow, radical Islam is destroyed. He's trying to get that following. So is Obama, the President of the United States, trying to do that. But then he adds this part about fundamentalists. Christians, he said, have a problem with fundamentalists too. During the time period of the Reformation and the Inquisition and all that, you know what happened to fundamentalists? Fundamentalists were people who believed in following the Bible as their rule of life, according to the papacy. They were also called heretics and put to death. Get this. Based on his comment, I would suggest you be careful. Because if you actually place the Bible as the guide for your life and not the teachings of the church, as explained by the papacy, you are considered a fundamentalist, and you have just been linked as on a similar parallel with the Islamic State. Now that might seem like a stretch, except in Daniel 11, the king of the north, right after it takes down radical Islam, goes after Christians that disagree. And so it's all happening all over again, just like it did in the previous conflicts. Then the Free Beacon on December 8. An alleged weapons maker for the Islamic State claimed that a radioactive device had been smuggled into an undisclosed location in Europe, according to an intelligence brief released Monday by the site intelligence group. That would be a dirty bomb. Attacking the Pope would be a good way to start a holy war pretty fast in this world and really kick it in the high gear. So would blowing off a dirty bomb, which is a regular bomb packed with radioactive material. And they're claiming that they've got one somewhere in Europe. If they do or not, it's another story, but they often tell us what they want to do, so when it happens, they get the credit for it. That would be another way to start a holy war pretty fast. And USA Today, a historic crowd of more than 1 million people, including more than 40 world leaders, jammed the streets on Sunday. This is in Paris. Leaders often at odds, such as Ukrainian president and Russian foreign minister, Israeli Netanyahu and Palestinian Mahmoud Abbas. So, what do we have? Charlie Hebdo, the French cartoon magazine, is attacked and people killed. 17 people die overall. A few Jews, these people in the magazine, and a couple of police officers. And this is a world story. 40 world leaders show up leading a parade of 1 million people. They got there with about 2 days' notice. My point here is, if the media gets behind a story and pushes it, and they're opposed to radical Islam as they were on that event, how long does it take the world leaders to come into line with the media? About 40 hours. What if there are people on the front of that parade that they really don't like? They'll be there anyway if the media is behind it. It took about 40 hours to unite the world in Paris. 17 people died. At about the same time, in Nigeria, this is the BBC, Nigeria says the number of people who lost their lives in an assault by Boko Haram militants on the town of Baga last week was no more than 150. The defense ministry said this figure included many of the terrorists who have attacked the town in the Borno state and faced resistance by troops. Local officials earlier estimated the number of deaths as many as 2,000. Nigeria has often been accused of underestimating casualty figures to downplay the threat of Boko Haram. Friends, it is now estimated that the number was probably around 2,500. Almost entirely Christian, that were killed by Muslims. At the same time, 17 people were killed in Paris. You heard an awful lot about Charlie Hebdo. But friends, that was a secular magazine. The media cares about that. They don't care about the holy war being of Christians under attack right now. The king of the south is pushing hard, and the king of the north is starting to push back. And when the media makes the switch, it will be brutal. But the media hasn't fully switched it over yet. But these kind of things continue to happen all over the world, and unless you're watching for them, you miss them happening. Then on February 15, 21 Coptic Christians were lined up on the beaches of Libya along the southern coast of the Mediterranean and beheaded on a YouTube video from the Islamic State. Then Franklin Graham, the next day, where is the universal condemnation by Muslim leaders around the world? We'd better heed this warning seriously, as these acts of terror will only spread throughout Europe and the United States. The storm is coming. World leaders that are watching this are realizing this is not some future thing. It's really coming. It's here. Then the Pope drew inspiration from this witness to urge Christians to work harder towards unity. I ask that we encourage one another to go forward with this ecumenism that is emboldening us, the ecumenism of blood. As Christians are being killed, the Pope is calling for a unity of Christians. Who would be the world leader of Christianity? The Pope would. He's calling people together. It is an ecumenism of blood. This is a bloody conflict. And we need to unite. That's what he's saying. Oh, does this sound like we're heading into a holy war? Very much so. Then, when they were done beheading those 21 Christians, one of the guys, the spokesperson of the group, takes a bloody finger and he points it north and he lets them know that we're coming after the nation of the cross. And he pointed straight at Italy, which was not that many miles away, straight north. And Italy and the Vatican now post extra guards because they're taking that threat very seriously. They put about 5,000 troops on the streets of Italy, watching for this. Then, March 13, in an unusually blunt endorsement of military action, the Vatican's top diplomat at the United Nations in Geneva has called for a coordinated international force to stop the so-called Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. He said the joint statement originated with Russia, which traditionally sees itself as the protector of Orthodox Christian in the Middle East. Okay, Malik wanted the Orthodox and the papal churches, the Catholic churches, to unite under the Pope. Putin considers himself the defender of Orthodox Christianity, and these two just less than a month ago called in a joint statement for an international force to go after the Islamic State. That's a holy war that you're looking at. So it was no guessed that the Pope was calling for military action back in August. They're still repeating it up into 2015 that that's exactly what they mean. Then the New York Post. Israel is not alone, with our Sunni Arab allies also viewing Iran as their mortal enemy. Senator John McCain quoted one of those Arab leaders as concluding, "We believe it's more dangerous to be a friend of America than an enemy." Because the United States has not been really dependable in this conflict. We've been flip-flopping all over the place. Have been for some time. These are unprecedented developments, veering so far from the norm and happening so fast. It said it would be like this is the New York Post. Veering so far from the norm and happening so fast that consequences are piling up faster than they can be comprehended. Have we maybe entered the whirlwind? Alliances built over decades are shattered in a relative flash, inviting aggression and endless conflict. The toxic brew of Islamic fanaticism and nuclear proliferation could ignite a world conflagration. But if you've been reading Daniel 11, you already knew that. But if you're watching Bible prophecy and what's happening in our world today, you realize this isn't a time to be filled with fear. This is a time to know that Jesus is coming soon. Yes, God's people are getting caught in the middle. But friends, they're the only ones left standing when it's done. And it's done in very short order. It's like a whirlwind. I'm looking forward to coming out the other side of the whirlwind. That's when there's no more pain, death, and suffering. No more war. Jesus will be putting an end to all this stuff. And so the most likely scenario at this moment is the Islamic State as the king of the South pushing against the rest of the world, the leader of Islam. However, there is another possibility. That's Iran, which this news story was just talking about. And Iran is quite possibly pushing for nuclear weapons, and they've already talked about wiping Israel off the face of the map. And they want to establish a Islamic caliphate in Jerusalem. They've even named their special forces after the Arabic name for Jerusalem. Their forces trained to fight outside of the country. So that's interesting. And right now, the Middle East is in turmoil because the United States is trying to befriend Iran. And in that, everybody's afraid. Saudi Arabia is openly saying they're probably going to just go buy nuclear weapons from Pakistan. And other Gulf states are thinking about doing the same thing. Okay, can you just imagine a Middle East with nuclear weapons? Oh, what a mess that would be. Especially when you have nations that want to wipe Israel off the face of the map. That's why Israel's so worried right now. And in Daniel 11, the king of the north enters Israel, and it overthrows many countries. It doesn't say it overthrows Israel. That might be a rescue mission. It might be an invasion, I'm not sure. But it could just as easily be a rescue mission. Maybe Israel gets in trouble. So what if the world is possibly able to somehow find a fix for the Islamic State, Sunni radical Islam, but lets Shiite Iranian radical Islam take over? It's just as bad, if not worse. Horror of horrors, worst case scenario. What if these two powers unite? How have you been able to unite Sunni and Shia in the past? Well, a war with Israel would do very nicely. Or a holy war against Israel and the rest of the Christian world combined. If they finally see it as a holy war that they're both should be on the same side of, if they unite, this world is in a big mess. That's why Russia and the United States, I still believe, are trying to keep Iran and the Islamic State and the radicals fighting each other to keep a lid on it. Because if they ever unite, this thing's a big mess. You'll just have to watch and see. I can't give you all the answers. The Bible prophecy only gives me a general overview. Then we have those who escape. This is the good part. Now, in Daniel 11, we have Edom, Moab, and Ammon escape, but it's paralleled in Daniel 12:1 by people who are delivered. Let's take a look at some parallels. In Daniel 11:41, it says, "These shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and Ammon." In Daniel 12:1, it says, "And at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book." Now notice the word escape and delivered are both underlined. In the Hebrew, they're the same word. The translators just made them separate words. And so Edom, Moab, and Ammon are the same as the people that are delivered. But the people that are delivered are those that are trusting in Jesus Christ in the context of Daniel 12:1. Is it possible that Edom, Moab, and Ammon are delivered because, yes, they're trusting in Jesus? Well, in the New Testament, anyone who trusts in Jesus is considered a descendant of Abraham. Edom, Moab, and Ammon are all related to the Abrahamic family in one way or another. Maybe that's a hint. Here are some more. In Revelation 17, "And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life when they see the beast." So in Daniel 12, those that are in the book are delivered. Revelation, you have two groups of people. Those that are in the book, God's people that are delivered, and those that are following the beast, those that are lost. Two kinds of people. But in Daniel 11, you have radical Islam overthrown. You have moderate Islam following papal-led Christianity. And you have Edom, Moab, and Ammon escaping. They don't follow. And if they don't follow and they escape or are delivered, that means they're in the Lamb's book of life. That's the only answer that I can come up with. Then I find some other stuff. 1 Thessalonians 5:2-4. "And they shall not escape, but you, brethren, are not in darkness, so that this day should overtake you as a thief. Only those who trust in Jesus escape." Hebrews 2:3. "How shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation, which at first began to be spoken by the Lord and was confirmed to us by those who heard him?" So Edom, Moab, and Ammon, if they're escaping, they're trusting in Jesus. Now, here's a map. It's the Davidic kingdom. And in the Davidic kingdom, Edom, Moab, and Ammon were a part of David's kingdom. And in the Bible, Jesus restores the Davidic kingdom. That means Edom, Moab, and Ammon would be a part of the restored Davidic kingdom. Take a look at this one. Amos 9, verses 11 and 12. "On that day I will raise up the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down, and repair its damages." That's the Davidic kingdom. "And rebuild it as in the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the Gentiles who are called by my name." Oh, the remnant of Edom. There's a little group out of Edom that come to Jesus and are called by his name. That means Edom, Moab, and Ammon represent those within Islam that take a stand for Jesus in the Bible. They won't follow the king of the north. They go, "No, thank you. We don't want a false brand of Christianity. We want the real thing. And we'll take a stand against the counterfeit." Boy, that's exciting. Acts 15 actually had a parallel to it. Now, look at this one. Joel 2, verse 28 and following. "And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. And it shall come to pass that whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be deliverance." And friends, all over the Islamic world, people are having dreams and visions, Muslims leading them to Jesus Christ. And they are followers of Isa. They see Isa the righteous one, a man in white, come to them. And Jesus tells them that they should trust in Jesus for their salvation. They should go to the Bible, the book, and become true people of the book. They don't call themselves Christians. They call themselves followers of Isa and people of the book. Because why would you want to be called Christians in the Muslim world when Christians were the crusaders that didn't really follow Jesus? They want to be followers of Jesus and followers of the book. Friends, if somebody is looking at Jesus as their Lord and Savior and that they believe he's their coming king and their judge, they sound like my brothers and sisters in Christ. And when radical Islam goes down, there's going to be nobody to stop them and true Christians from sharing true Christianity all over the world. We've got the greatest evangelistic opportunity of all time, but that's really getting ahead. That's verses 44 and 45 in the next presentation. Let me just say this. While I was in northern Nigeria last year, I met about 10 pastors who were once Muslim and became Christian because of dreams and visions that they had. The one guy was a Muslim judge, and he'd led 12 Christians to become Muslims until Jesus comes to him in a dream and a vision and tells him, no, you're doing it the wrong way. And through a series of dreams and visions and then meeting with some Christians, he began a time of study, and he is now a leader for Jesus Christ, leading Muslims to Jesus Christ. And he does it at the risk of his life every day, where he's at in northeastern Nigeria. There are people with real courage out there that are taking a stand between the two even today. And sometimes they live and sometimes they die. But if you die serving Jesus Christ, you have nothing to fear in eternity, if you're trusting in him as your Lord and Savior. So, we have Islam attacking papal-led Christianity. Friends, can you not see that that appears to be happening already? Oh, I could be wrong, but it's getting harder to see that that's not happening. Radical Islam doesn't really plan on stopping unless somebody stops them. And so I can't see the Christian world or the West not becoming involved. And then papal-led Christianity unites. And that's happening to overthrow radical Islam. And so then you have papal-led Christianity in control. And what happens next? That's what we're going to be looking at in our next presentation. This is a time to trust in Jesus, study your Bible, and start sharing a gospel message with the world, because the greatest evangelistic opportunity of all time is just around the corner. And that's what we're going to be picking up in Tidings from the East and the Mark of the Beast. The parallels between Daniel 11, 44 and 45 and Revelation chapter 13. They're amazing parallels.
This has been a production of Sealing Time Ministries. For more programs like this and other exciting topics and speakers, you can visit our website at www.sealingtime.com.